It is the late summer of 1854, and the greatest city in the world is hiding a deadly secret. The streets of London are packed with people, horses, and wooden carts. Everyone is moving through a thick, smelly fog. But something much worse than the bad smell is creeping through the narrow alleys. A terrifying sickness called cholera is sweeping through the neighborhoods. It strikes without any warning at all, and it moves with shocking speed. A person could wake up feeling perfectly healthy, enjoy a normal breakfast with their family, and be gone before the sun goes down. Whole families are being wiped out in a matter of hours. The city is gripped by fear, and nobody knows how to stop this invisible killer. Imagine walking down your own street and seeing empty houses where your friends used to live just days ago. People are locking their doors, closing their windows as tight as they can, and praying they will be safe. The hospitals are completely full, and the doctors are exhausted from working all day and night. Mothers and fathers hold their children close, terrified of every little cough or stomach ache. The panic is everywhere, hanging over the city like a dark storm cloud that refuses to blow away. Everyone is asking the exact same question. Where is this monster coming from, and how is it sneaking into our homes? At the time, the smartest doctors in the world thought they had the answer. They firmly believed in the centuries-old bad air theory. They called this invisible enemy miasma. According to this idea, diseases were born in stinky, rotting garbage and floated through the air like an evil mist. If you breathed in the bad smells, you got sick. It made perfect sense to them because London in 1854 was a very smelly place. There were no garbage trucks, and waste was just dumped into the streets or tossed into the river. The doctors told everyone to clean up the foul smells and stay away from the stinky fog. They were absolutely certain the bad air was to blame. But one quiet, thoughtful doctor named John Snow did not agree. He was a brilliant man who loved to solve puzzles, and he paid very close attention to how things worked. Dr. Snow looked at how the sickness acted, and something bothered him deeply. If the bad air was making people sick, why did it only affect their stomachs and not their lungs? If the wind blew the smelly fog all over the city, why were some streets completely safe while the street right next to them was a disaster zone? The pieces of the puzzle just did not fit together. He suspected the invisible killer was not floating in the sky at all. He believed it was hiding in the drinking water. To prove his idea, Dr. Snow did something incredibly brave. While everyone else was running away from the sick neighborhoods, he walked right into the middle of the worst outbreak in the Soho district. The danger was everywhere, but his curiosity was much stronger than his fear. He went from door to door, knocking on the houses of grieving families. He spoke to them gently, asking very specific questions. He did not ask about the smells in their homes or the fog outside. Instead, he asked where they got their drinking water. He listened to their heartbreaking stories and carefully wrote down every single detail in his notebook. Listening to these sad stories was not easy for the kind doctor. Dr. Snow saw empty beds and crying children. He met people who had lost their entire families in a single weekend. Every tally mark in his notebook represented a real person with a real life that had been cut short. The sorrow in the air was thick enough to touch, but he knew that the only way to honor these lost lives was to find the truth. He used his deep sadness as fuel to keep going. He walked up and down the infected streets until his shoes were worn out and his hands were tired from writing. Then, Dr. Snow did something that would change the world forever. He went back to his desk, took out a map of the Soho neighborhood, and started drawing tiny black bars. Each little black bar stood for one person who had died. He placed the marks exactly on the street addresses where the sickness had struck. He was turning his notebook of sadness into a picture that anyone could see. As he drew more and more black marks, the messy jumble of numbers turned into a clear story. He was making the invisible enemy visible for the very first time. A terrifying and amazing pattern jumped right off the paper, The black marks were not spread out evenly across the map. They were not blowing around randomly like leaves in the wind. Instead, they formed a giant, dark cluster right in the middle of the neighborhood. And right at the very center of that dark cluster was one specific thing. It was a single public water pump on Broad Street. Almost every person who died lived closer to the Broad Street pump than any other water source in the city. The single map was pointing a giant arrow right at the killer. To be absolutely sure he was right, Dr. Snow looked for the odd pieces that did not fit the pattern. He found a large workhouse right near the Broad Street pump where almost nobody got sick. Why were they safe? He discovered they had their own private water well and did not use the pump. He also found a brewery nearby where the workers stayed perfectly healthy. It turned out the workers drank the beer they made instead of the local water. And then he heard about a lady who lived far away but still died of the sickness. He found out she loved the taste of the Broad Street water so much that she had it delivered to her house in a bottle. These strange little stories proved his map was telling the exact truth. Armed with his incredible drawing, Dr. Snow marched into a meeting with the city officials. These were powerful men who firmly believed in the bad air. They did not want to listen to a quiet doctor talking about water. But Dr. Snow placed his map on the table. He showed them the dark cluster on Broad Street. He explained the stories of the brewery and the lady who lived far away. He did not yell or argue with them. He just let the brilliant picture do the talking. The evidence was so strong and so clear that even the most stubborn men in the room had to pay attention. Dr. Snow asked the officials to do one very simple thing. He told them to remove the handle from the Broad Street water pump. He explained that if people could not pump the water, they could not drink it, and the sickness would stop. The officials were very skeptical, but they finally agreed to try it just to see what would happen. They sent a worker to take the heavy iron handle off the pump. It was such a small action. It took almost no money and very little time. But that one tiny change was about to perform a miracle for the city of London. Almost immediately, the terrible sickness stopped spreading in Soho. Without the deadly water, the invisible monster starved and vanished. People stopped getting sick. The hospitals finally caught their breath and started to empty out. The dark storm cloud of fear began to lift from the neighborhood. Families could walk outside again without being terrified of their own shadows. By simply taking a piece of metal off a machine, Dr. Snow had saved countless lives. The puzzle was completely solved, and the killer was locked away for good. The ripples of his discovery spread far and wide, reshaping human understanding. The old ways of thinking crumbled away. The centuries-old bad air theory was disproved once and for all. Doctors realized that you could not just smell a sickness to know where it came from. You had to look closer. You had to follow the clues, track the numbers, and find the real hidden source. The medical world transformed completely. Healing was no longer just about guessing and hoping. It was about careful observation and undeniable proof. This incredible detective work led to the birth of epidemiology. That is a big word, but it just means the science of tracking how diseases spread and figuring out how to stop them. Dr. Snow showed the world that sickness acts like a sneaky criminal leaving footprints behind. If you map the footprints, you can catch the bad guy. Today, every time doctors track a flu outbreak or a new virus, they are walking in the footsteps of that brave man in Soho. They are using his clever tools to keep us all safe and healthy. The map did even more than change medicine. It changed how we build our entire world. Once city leaders finally understood that dirty water was dangerous, they started making massive changes. They built giant, amazing sewer systems deep under the streets to carry waste far away from the drinking water. They created water treatment plants to make sure what comes out of our sinks is completely safe to drink. Every single time you turn on a faucet and get a glass of clean, clear water, you have Dr. Snow and his beautiful map to thank. It is truly wonderful to think about how much power lies in a simple drawing. A piece of paper covered with tiny black marks defeated a monster that nobody could see. It shows us that human curiosity is one of the strongest forces on Earth. When we refuse to accept the easy answers, when we ask hard questions and look closely at the world around us, we can solve the deepest mysteries. Dr. Snow did not have magic powers or super strength. He just had a notebook, a pencil, and a deep love for his fellow humans. The map of Broad Street still exists today for people to see. It is a beautiful reminder of a moment when the lights came on in the dark. It stands as a brilliant monument to human smarts and bravery. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest leaps forward do not happen in fancy laboratories with expensive equipment. Sometimes they happen on muddy streets, driven by a normal person who simply wants to help his neighbors. It is a true story of how paying attention to the little things can save the entire world. So, the next time you look at a map, remember the quiet doctor of London. Remember how a simple pattern on paper changed medicine forever. The human mind is a brilliant light, constantly pushing back the shadows of the unknown. We are natural explorers, born to track down the truth and make the world a better, safer place for everyone. The story of the Broad Street Pump is a joyful celebration of that beautiful, endless curiosity.